Every leader has their own style and their own way of leading. And today's guest, Wendy Clark, the global CEO of Dentsu Aegis Network, the fourth largest advertising and media agency in the world, leads with what I'd say is a fervor and an absolute creativity that sets her apart. She's got so much energy. Wendy, it's been a long time since we talked, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me.
Thank you, David. It's wonderful to be with you.
Wendy, I understand that you started out as a receptionist for a 10-person advertising agency in Atlanta, Georgia. Tell us about that experience and what you learned from it.
Well, it was a great experience. I had gone to college, much like you, with your journalism degree. I had a creative writing degree, and I came out of school convinced I wanted to write advertising. And promptly, as none of your younger listeners will know, printed and mailed resumes to available jobs, and none of them came through, which was not surprising because I didn't really have much work experience. But one agency in Sandy Springs, just outside Atlanta, had an opening for a receptionist, and they called me and said, would you be interested in interviewing for this? And in the moment, I just wanted to get my foot in the door. I was convinced if I could get in somewhere, I could prove myself. And so I went and interviewed, and I took the job as a receptionist. And my job was to make sure that the very charismatic leader who drank Tab and had two cats, she would come in and say, Wendy, my cats haven't eaten in a day. Can you go get cats food? I mean, I did all the things that anyone did in an entry-level role, but I think most importantly in that experience, the life lesson that I carry with me today is to never be above doing anything. And I have never forgotten that experience. I've never forgotten how people treated me, some well, some not so well. But my desire to just get in and prove myself ultimately unlocked plenty of opportunity for me.
Did you ever get to use your creative writing skills?
I did, because quickly I moved from, being a receptionist to, hey, can you help us with this press release? Hey, can you help us with this ad copy? So I did start doing that. That was the point at which, though, I realized that my writing skills weren't quite where they needed to be to make it in the big leagues. And I talk about, on the 10th revision with red lines through my copy, where the only word I had actually created was "and" that was left in the paragraph. I knew I had to kind of flip to the account management side. So I flipped to a different side and went up that side.
You and I went through that same basic experience. There's nothing more sobering than looking at a blank sheet of paper. You have to fill it up with an idea.
Yes.
I also remember in one of our conversations that you told me that you were a shift manager when you were 16 years old for McDonald's. Now what'd you learn about leadership and how to lead from that experience?
Well, I am a huge fan of McDonald's. I've had the privilege now to work on their business as an advertising person and marketer. But, that formative experience for me was huge. Again, young age, went to work there. The whole entire reason I went there was because I wanted to buy a car. And I had an aunt who had a little bit of money and said, anything you save, I'll match. So it's very incented to save some money and get her matched money to get my first car. And I sort of went there and progressed through McDonald's and became a shift manager. And as a shift manager, responsible for everything that happens on that shift. So customer satisfaction, employee insubordination, cash management. I was making bank deposits. I was doing inventory control. And what I realized from that experience was I wouldn't have been able to really define what this thing called business was, but I really liked business. I thought, if this is business, I like this thing called business. And, I've carried it with me forever. And to have that kind of measure of responsibility at a young age was very formative and impressionable. And I think McDonald's does a wonderful job, and most of the category. If you want it, you can have huge responsibility at a very young age and really learn some wonderful formative skills.
Yeah, I always feel like the industry is a bit maligned because I love McDonald's advertising campaign. I don't know if you did it or not, where it's your very best first job.
That was one of our agencies. My former job, it was Alma, which was a Hispanic agency in the DDB network. It's a wonderful piece of work, and it's true. It's a very true feeling for, I think the number is 1 in 8 or 1 in 9 Americans has worked at McDonald's.
That's a big number. Yeah. Now here you are, the CEO of Dentsu Aegis Network. How does it feel to accomplish something like that when you start out as a receptionist, worked as a shift manager. How do you feel today about that accomplishment?
Well, it's an incredible privilege. I think that all of us in roles and responsibilities where thousands of people look to us for vision and for their sustained prosperity in their careers. First and foremost, you have to think about that deep privilege and responsibility you have to all of those people. I always say on the other side of the privilege, can't get too caught up in that because there's a pressure too. There's an immense pressure to run a healthy and performing business. We're a publicly traded company on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, and I never forget that I'm responsible to shareholders too. But the way I would characterize my life, I mean, even before the receptionist job and the shift manager, I was raised by a single mother. I don't think that anyone would have thought of the young girl who went to 5 different schools in 5 years would be in a position like this. And I would characterize my life as improbable. If you'd ever asked me, I would have said it's highly improbable that young girl who was very shy and quite unsure, from divorced parents and really jumping around schools, changing continents at the age of 11. I was raised in England and then moved to the US, could ever have the ability to be in a role like this. So I'm always grateful. I'm always thankful. I never take it for granted. And I'm quite certain there are other Wendy's in our 45,000 associates that I want to reach out to and let them know they too, with hard work, with some focus and with a lot of luck and support from wonderful mentors and friends, can achieve things that are beyond their wildest dreams.
Well, you've certainly done that, and before this job, you were the head of Coca-Cola marketing, which is the largest, the number one marketing job in the world easily. Then you became CEO, DDD Needham, and then what do you think when you just looking back, from your prior jobs, what big leadership traits do you think you picked up that's made you the right person for this job at this point in time?
Well, I'm sure there's some good ones and some not so good ones. I think at the almost age of 50, some of those are pretty well worn in. But perhaps more than anything, I do try to approach the job with empathy. I really do try to approach the job thinking about the people in our midst who are doing the hard work every day. I have the privilege of doing things like strategy and planning, but I'm not at the coalface of the business, and I never forget that I'm not at the coalface of the business. And the people who are doing the incredibly hard work. And so I try to have a lot of humanity, a lot of empathy. I mean, certainly during a time like right now, during these very challenging times, it's more important than ever to be human, to be accessible, to care, to be transparent and open. We actually are doing live Q&As right now every week with our teams, where the teams can show up. They can ask me absolutely anything, and they can do it anonymously. And I think it's my responsibility to be that accessible and that available, and then to answer very candidly. And there are times, David, when I don't have the answers. I said just this morning on our live Q&A, in my 29 years of working, there's not a tab in my playbook that says, here's what to do during a pandemic. We as leaders across all businesses are doing our very best. We're learning in real time. We're adjusting in real time. We're trying to listen and learn in real time. And make those adjustments and pivots that we think are best for our company. And that starts with best for our people. But there are certain to be things that we don't have the answers for, and or quite candidly that we'll do wrong. And I think it's just that ability to recognize, be empathetic, be open, and accept when we've done something not so right, and make that quick pivot, which will define our leadership and ultimately our success.
By the way, Wendy, where is your corporate headquarters?
So Dentsu Group is headquartered in Tokyo. Dentsu International, which is the division that I lead, is headquartered in London. My office is in New York, and I'm talking to you from Atlanta, where my home is. Since I worked at Coke for 8 years, I never moved my family. So there's a lot of moving parts in that answer.
Well, what's it like leading a company that has its roots in being founded in Japan?
It's incredible. Thank you for asking. And what I keep telling people is I got exactly what I thought I was buying, and much, much more. And what I didn't fully understand about a 120-year-old company founded in 1901. The deep roots of a Japanese company, how kind and caring the culture is. I've sort of marked it as instinctively generous. This is an instinctively generous company and has been for decades. It also has a wonderfully long view, so it's very deliberate. It takes its time, assesses and considers, and moves with a deliberate nature. The founder of the company in 1901 was a wartime correspondent. He was a journalist, like you, by training, and he wanted to keep reporting. And so he founded a company. I believe he's probably one of the earliest people to believe in ad-supported journalism, because he founded an advertising and journalism company. And he printed business cards, and on the back of the business card, it said, "Prepared to sacrifice for advertising." And so I find such incredible strength and relevance in the roots and the DNA of this company that have carried it now for decades. And I will just be one little, notch along the way of what will be another 120 years for Denso. It's a phenomenal organization of high integrity and high generosity, and I'm very glad to be here. One sub note: I actually am taking Japanese, so I take Japanese lessons twice a week.
Wow.
Because I had some gardening leave in between jobs. I thought, well, I should acquire a new skill, so I just had my Japanese lesson early today. I think I've mostly apologized to my sensei that I'm butchering the language, but I'm trying.
Yeah, well, that means a lot. It's not an easy language to learn for sure. And Wendy, you changed jobs right in the midst of COVID. What steps have you had to take to establish yourself as the new CEO and determine the priorities for your agency in a pandemic world? I mean, this is, it's not like you can go sit down and talk to everybody.
No, I'm quite the contrary. And in every job that I've ever done, I would have told you, if we were talking in non-pandemic times, I was the person who traveled every week of the year. I was on a plane at least twice, usually 3 to 4 times a week, pre-pandemic. And so to be sat here in my home now for months has been an extraordinary feeling. It's had a lot of positives in the sense of, different work style and being much more present with my family than I ever was, and learning new skills on how to connect with people. But I definitely miss that ability to visit a market. It's an absolute honor to have global roles. I had a global role at Coke also, and at DDB, to go into people's markets, to go into their cultures, to be welcomed into their cultures, to learn about their business, to meet with clients. I mean, it's such a privilege. Eat their food. I mean, it was one of my favorite aspects of the job, and so I miss that terribly. But the show must go on, and we are leading this company through a challenging time, no question. And I believe we are doing as good a job as we would do if we were in person, which I think is an interesting thought. The other day, one of my colleagues' small daughters walked in during one of our meetings, and I said to him, I so look forward to a time when I get to meet your daughter. And he said, I so look forward to a time when I get to meet you. And I had not remembered that I only, in the interview process, met with just 2 of the people on the team, other than the Dentsu group in Tokyo. So every one of my team members, I have 16 direct reports on our exec, only 2 of them I have met in person. So it's an extraordinary thought that actually, as we're leading through these unprecedented times, leading a transformation, an accelerated transformation of the company, doing it with people I've actually never shook hands with, never hugged, never looked in their eyes physically, is a really remarkable thought. But I'm definitely looking forward to when we can.
Denso obviously has a great heritage, but as I understand it, you kind of are in a bit of a turnaround situation. Is that too strong a statement to make, and if so, how are you attacking that?
Well, I wouldn't say turnaround. I would say, unfortunately, like the rest of the industry, we've experienced revenue decline this year. We are in the service business after all, and most, if not all, of our clients have been impacted. So therefore, our business has been impacted too. So we're calling it a transformation. I mean, I think one thing I learned from Muhtar Kent at Coke was never waste a crisis. And so we are accelerating the transformation of our business that we would like to come out of this pandemic actually leaping forward and having had reimagined the business in places that are, we will no longer need certain capabilities. We want to accelerate new and emerging capabilities we know our clients want. Dentsu does what I believe is the most measured study of CMOs that I've seen. Every year, it's a longitudinal study. We talked to over 1,360 CMOs this year in 12 countries to understand where we were. This was in June. And so we are using that incisive understanding to inform our strategy and our vision moving forward. The amazing things that came out of that study, just 1 in 10 CMOs right now are using new strategies through the pandemic, which then suggests that 9 in 10 are using exactly the same strategy. They haven't changed anything given the pandemic. And yet that would not reflect the marketplace that we see with the challenges in front of business. So the number one thing they want to understand is consumer behaviors, what behaviors are going to permanently change, which will bounce back, and how to make that meaningful progress for their brands and for their companies. And so we are putting ourselves right in the center of that challenge.
Now, when you talk about CMOs, you're talking about chief marketing officers, and you were a
Yes.
chief marketing officer at Coca-Cola Company. And how much do you think that really prepared you to become an outstanding advertising agency executive? Because you moved from the client side to the agency side, and that's a big shift.
It is a big shift. And any of our teams will tell you that I slip right back into my client persona often. I call myself Connie Client every now and then because I can see it so vividly, given that I've spent the majority of my career on the client side when we're putting together a presentation or putting together work. I can look at it easily through the client side and go, no, that's not going to work. Here's how the client's going to hear that. And so I call myself bilingual. I'm not bilingual yet in Japanese, but I am bilingual in agency and client speak. And I think it's been a huge advantage, quite honestly. As part of my onboarding, I'm talking to about 3 or 4 of our clients every week right now. And it's a hugely comfortable place for me to be. I, look at them and think, I'm more familiar with sitting in your chair probably than I am sitting in my own chair. So there's a wonderful, again, empathy, right, and connection of shared experiences that is immediate for us. And I quite like that.
And Wendy, you're the first female executive to hold a top job at any of the big 6 advertising firms in the world. Does that put any additional pressure on you? Do you even think about it?
When I was considering taking the role, there's no question. I want to live into charting a path for women. I want to do my part. I have 2 daughters and a son who have the same genetic makeup. They have the same education. They've gone to the same school. And yet my daughters look into a world and see less opportunity and less potential for them. And that feels patently unfair to me, that everything else is the same except their gender. And right now, my son will have more opportunity and will have more earning power. That just doesn't make sense. So part of what I think my job is to do is to try to even that scale. And so I want to own that responsibility, no question. I believe what Sheryl Sandberg says, which is you can't be what you can't see. And so if my doing this job helps other women see that they too can do it, I find that important, and I want to be that person. At the same time, I don't wake up every morning and go, gosh, I'm a female CEO, so I better, it's not top of my mind. I just want to be a good leader for our people. I want to be a good leader for our clients. I want to say that, I don't believe anyone gets up in the morning and wants to be mediocre, for one. I don't think anyone wakes up and goes, I think I'll just be average today. I wake up every day and want to have a reason why I went to work, and for people to feel that I was present and that I helped them achieve what they wanted to. I want our clients to feel that, our people to feel that. So that really doesn't factor back most days into my mind as being a woman.
When I was CEO of Yum Brands, you headed Coca-Cola marketing, and we had a little business with you around the world. And we had you speak more than once to our marketers on the power of social media, because you were renowned for being, and still are, for being a social media guru, a great digital marketer. How did you learn that skill?
Well, it was an incredible privilege to work at Coca-Cola. You called them earlier one of the best marketers in the world. I can remember when I was working at AT&T and the recruiter called me, and I told them that I wasn't going to interview for the job, and went home that night and just happened to mention it over dinner to my husband that Coke had called, but I definitely wasn't going to talk to them. And my husband kind of leaned in and looked at me. He's like, so let me get this straight. One of the best marketers in the world called you and they want you to interview for a role, but you're definitely not going to talk to them. And I was like, yeah, no, it's not right for our family. And, I had all the reasons in the world why anyone talks themselves out. And, thankfully to my husband, he said, Wendy, I mean, you've worked 18 years. This is one of the best marketers. You should go there. And Coke has what I would call a wheat and chaff operating system. You either can keep up or you can't. And there's a very quick separation. And, I never got my MBA, but I think the almost 8 years I spent at Coke taught me an awful lot more about what I didn't know. I was around incredibly talented and incredibly good marketers. It was a privilege to work with them. I hope in some way that I added something to what we were doing while we were there. But there was, you can't help but learn. You can't help but be good. Coke demands it and it requires it. And if you're unwilling to do the work and keep up, then you just kind of get left with the chaff.
Well, you didn't just learn. I mean, you were the best at it at any company. I mean, you were the guru, really, literally. You were known for knowing more about social media and digital than anybody else that we knew of anyway. And, what do you think a leader needs to know about social and digital today?
Well, I think I'd probably just expound on that thought and say, you have to know your customer. You have to know your consumer. And that means you have to know their habits. You have to know their needs, their wants, their mindsets. And, for Coca-Cola, their lifeblood, their livelihood required us to recruit the next generation of teenage drinkers every year. In years where the marketing teams had lost that focus, you could follow the life cycle of that drinker, never quite drinking as much as the recruiters, that generation or that cohort that had been recruited. So we had a very deep and specific focus on teenage recruitment. And so if you're about recruiting the next 15 or 16-year-old, you had to know digital, you had to know gaming, you had to know social media. I mean, you had to know and understand your consumer, your target, so that you put your brand, and by the way, a 130-year-old brand that hadn't changed in 130 years, at the center of their universe. How do you do that if you've got an immovable product where there was no chance that the ingredient, that was a sacrilege to say that you're going to change the formula of Coke, right? Someone tried that in the 80s, didn't work out. So you're not going to change the formula of the product. You're not going to change the brand, the look, the feel of the brand. So the only thing you could do was change everything around the brand. And that meant you had to deeply put it in an authentic way into social media, into gaming, into experiences. We went into esports. I mean, everything that teenagers were doing, we were there. And as a marketer, you had to know it.
What would you think would be your biggest marketing success you had at Coca-Cola? And tell us a story about it.
Well, to be clear, again, as I said earlier, working with these incredibly talented teams and incredibly talented agencies was a privilege. So let me be clear that I had, perhaps a role in finding the funding for something and helping shepherd things through approvals, but in no way did I create it. But our teams were brilliant. I think the piece of work that I point to the most, that I'm incredibly proud of to this day, was a piece of work called the Happiness Machine. And it was an idea that came from Leo Burnett in Sydney at the time. And they came in through our central team, and then we worked very closely with our teams in India and Pakistan. And what the Happiness Machine did was use technology where people could see each other. We had a Coke machine, but they could see each other on either side of the machine. So it had a camera and then it had a screen. And we united people who had been separated for a number of years, decades, in Pakistan and India through our Coke machines. And this was right on strategy, because the strategy for Coke is that a Coke is best shared. A Coke is around happiness and togetherness. And so you would see, we videoed them, people in a mall walking up to this sort of strange machine and touching it, and it would give you directions like trace a heart, make a heart with your finger or put your hand on the screen. But it was doing it in the other country too. And so you saw two people who'd never met before tracing a heart together on a screen or putting a hand together. And if they did it, then they got a Coke. And so it created an audience, because then you did something. So then more and more people in these, in these markets or in these malls were doing this. And I still, to this day, it's on YouTube. You can Google it. I get choked up watching it. The humanity of it was incredible. Now, in order to pull that off, we did have to take the idea to Muhtar Kent, because you can't suddenly start to put two conflicted countries together as a brand and not let your CEO know that you're thinking about doing something like that. And, again, lessons in leadership of people all around me. Muhtar looked at it and said, give that to me on a flash drive, because I'm going to send it to Secretary Kerry, John Kerry, who's the Secretary of State at the time, and show him the role that private companies can play in bringing the globe and bringing society together. And that Coke took its role very seriously and things like that. And we pulled off that idea. And I to this day, I think it's a wonderful example of doing well by doing good, and the role and the importance of companies doing more than just selling a product, but making the world better.
I love that story. That's fantastic. And all the while you were at Coke, you had a major competitor with Pepsi. What did that teach you on how to look at competition? And what do you tell your clients today about competition and how to deal with it?
Well, I am a competitive person by nature, David. That probably won't surprise you. I mean, the best thing people can do is underestimate me. So, when Pepsi would make those moves, it just lit the fires for me and for our teams. So I think first of all, I think it's good to have a competitor. I think it makes you better. I think Pepsi were an exceptionally well-run company with brilliant marketers of their own, and we could never sleep. You could never rest back and go, well, that's got the share gain one, so we'll just sit back here. I mean, you always had to be on your toes with a great competitor. So I think number one, competitors make you better. Number two, at the moments where you don't do well, you'll know it very quickly, because they're going to rush into that gap and make it hurt. So it reminds you to stay at the top of your game. At the time that I was leading marketing in North America, Brad Jakeman was leading marketing at Pepsi globally, and he and I were friends through the industry. And I think if you had him on here with me, we would both say we're friends to this day. We made each other better. We defied each other to out market one another, and it makes it fun. But we were also very different companies. And one of the lessons that I would always continually remind our teams is you can be a worse them or a better you. The minute we stopped following our own strategy and would get distracted by Pepsi's and try and be Pepsi, we'd only ever be a second best Pepsi. We could be a better Coke, though. And that principle not only holds for brands and companies, it holds for individuals. I use it as a leader. I can look at you and go, gosh, David is so incredible, but I'll only be a second best you. I can be a better Wendy. And so I think just always that notion of being the best possible you can be, I think is really important.
I love that. Worse them, better you. That is really good. And Wendy, I was so impressed with you. I hope you remember this, but I flew to Atlanta to recruit you to be one of the heads of our major brands, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, or KFC. I didn't care. I wanted to get you in any one of them. Okay. And I can't believe it. You turned me down. I mean, why'd you do that?
Well, we had a lovely lunch. I think it was at the Four Seasons. I remember it vividly, and that's where I remember that your wife's name is Wendy from our lunch. I think it wasn't the sometimes you just have to go on instinct of what was the right time. And I was not quite finished with what I wanted to do at Coke yet. And I felt like I had more to learn. I think where I have always known when I needed to leave something was when I was into sort of muscle memory. And when I get into muscle memory, my focus isn't as good. I start getting distracted. And so I need sort of new things. And there was still new frontier to understand at Coke. But the minute I got to, okay, now I'm into muscle memory, then I know I need to move on. I wasn't quite at that point when we talked, but I was highly, highly flattered. Highly. Thank you.
That was a tough loss, because I really wanted to get you. When you think about it and you think about leadership, Wendy, how does your marketing background influence your leadership style? Do you apply any marketing techniques to leading people?
That's a great question. I definitely do. And it goes back to one of the earlier answers. I often get asked this as a female, and I think it probably applies to both men and women. But people will ask me, because still, typically, often, I am the only woman in a leadership setting, in a very senior leadership setting. I can be one of a couple, but we're certainly not at 50-50. And the question I'll invariably get asked is, how do you make sure you're heard? How do you make sure that you cut through? And do you adjust your style to be heard? And I think women particularly are quite surprised when I answer, yes, I do, because they go, then you're not your true self. You're not your authentic self if you have to adjust. And I say, no, not at all. This is marketing. Marketing, what we do as marketers is we understand an audience. We create a message that will compel that audience to take a certain action that will create a certain outcome for a brand and a company. That's what marketing is. Well, I can apply that quite simply to that boardroom. I have an audience. I want them to hear my message so that they take an action that creates the outcome that I want. It's exactly the same thing. Therefore, it's on me to make sure the audience hears me. It's not on my audience to make sure they hear me. That's not the way it works. And so I'm quite comfortable and, in fact, desiring to assess and understand the audience I'm talking to, understand what their objections might be, their habits, their needs, their wants. Or do they have short attention spans, or do they need a lot of detail? I mean, it could be on one end of the spectrum, the other end. Understand your audience, adjust how you deliver so that your audience can best receive your message and therefore get the outcome that you want. I don't find that somehow debilitative or limiting or debilitating, I don't know, at all. I find that absolutely empowering. I think that I'm actually the smarter person in that moment that will take the steps to do that. So marketing absolutely informs my way of leading. And I actually find them quite interchangeable. I will always call, yes, I'm a CEO, but I will always call myself a marketer.
It's really funny. I wrote a book called Taking People With You. It's all based on having marketing insights into people to figure out how to get them on board, move forward. So I couldn't agree with you more. Agencies are supposed to bring their clients big ideas, and so what kind of culture are you trying to create to cultivate a big idea environment? And how can you even do that in a virtual world that you're in right now?
Right. Oh, David, you're walking down a day with me. Yeah. So yes, we are paid for our ideas, and the best way I know how to incent people to bring their best thinking to work is actually to invite them to be their full selves at work. So that starts with the culture first and foremost. That we have a culture that welcomes people to cross our threshold, even if that's a virtual threshold, every day and be exactly who they are. We don't want conformists. We don't want homogeneity. We want you with all your points, all of your idiosyncrasies, all of the specialness that is you. And by the way, that obviously extends into full diversity and inclusion. And so, number one, it's that the people we hire are hired to be their authentic selves, and they are welcomed into our culture that way. When you do that, people have a stability and a security in your environment that they can truly unlock and bring their best thinking. They're not thinking about, oh, well, I shouldn't talk about, this cultural view, or, my religion or my sexual orientation or something. It all is welcome. And so then you can move into kind of bringing all your best thinking. So that's sort of one thought. The other is what we're trying to do a lot is sort of teach what great work looks like. So we're really bringing the work to the forefront of all of our gatherings to say, and here's another piece of good work. So here is the strategy, here is the work, here's why it worked, here were the results, and really continually use our own work, the metaphor, the dog's eating the dog food, really use our own work to set the expectation, to set the bar, and to teach what good looks like, and have sort of radical collaboration across our organization so that we become a constant teaching and learning environment. I often reference that I will always be learning, always be learning. All of us have to. So I think if we can give the security and foundation of being welcoming fully to people, and then really have a sort of notion of setting and teaching, setting the benchmark, setting the bar, sharing and learning together. And then, of course, ultimately working with wonderful clients who give us these incredible briefs and trust us with their brands and live into the responsibility of serving them well and being, students of their brands and their companies. All of that coalesces to really unlocking great ideas that move business and create results.
So Wendy, you have to evaluate ideas all the time. You're looking at them every day, for your clients, So what process do you go through, or what do you ask yourself to really identify a really great idea, a big idea? Because our listeners, they've got to evaluate ideas all the time. What can you tell them that you do that might help them?
Well, okay. First and foremost, I always want to see the strategy. Because evaluating work or any sort of idea or execution without understanding what the intention was doesn't make it. I can see brilliant ideas all day long, but if they're not addressing what the need of a company or brand is, then it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. So number one is, let me see the strategy and what we've been asked to achieve and what the outcome has to be. What does the outcome and performance success look like? So number one, so I've got that programmed in my mind when I'm looking at any idea. I know what it's supposed to do. So number one, can it achieve what we've been asked to do is the number one priority of the work. Number two, I look at it through a lens of does it have some sort of aspect where is it useful, interesting, share-worthy, compelling? Like work has to make you feel something, right? We're in a business of moving people, and people are moved by emotions. And so I want some sort of feeling when I look at work. And by the way, that doesn't always have to be happy or sad or emotional. Just like, am I compelled by it? Do I want to, oh gosh, I want to share that on my social networks. I want someone to see it. Does it have a purpose and utility? Gosh, am I smarter because I looked at that and now I understand something I didn't, and there's a utilitarian purpose. You go very quickly through, is it just like wallpaper and you just put it in the pile of the 5,000 brand impacts that US humans have every day? So US consumers see over 5,000 brands every day. So it's either going to go in that pile, or I'm going to feel something that will make me remember it. So that's the second thing. And then the final thing I think is, where you want to be is this something that only this brand can do? Could any other brand put their name on the end of this idea? Or is this really so discrete to that strategy and this brand and this moment that people will remember and know that's associated with that brand? So those are sort of the three things I'm going through when I'm looking at ideas and thinking about whether they work.
And Wendy, I know you talk about the importance of brands and companies having a challenger mindset. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think there's a great book written by Adam Morgan, who is a longtime planner in the advertising business, and it's called, I think he's going to not forgive me now, I think it's called Eating the Big Fish. I was going to say Eating the Giant Fish, but I think it's called Eating the Big Fish. And it's all around challenger branding. And even when I was at AT&T, when we were the big fish, we always have to take the challenger mindset, because I think if you take the challenger mindset, you care. You always think of yourself as David going up against Goliath, right? And you try harder. You don't sit back on your laurels. You don't think, I've got this done, and then Pepsi comes along and eats your lunch. So I think the challenger mindset just keeps you hungry. It keeps you focused. It never lets you rest. It drives innovation. It drives ingenuity. It drives excitement. And frankly, those are the sort of the attributes of people you want on your team, that you want working for. It doesn't matter that your company is 120 years old, 130 years old. You are the steward of that brand in that moment. You have a responsibility to leave it better than you found it. And you can't rest on past success. The great axiom that I'll say is, like, today's headlines tomorrow are just yesterday's news. No one cares.
You're right about that. And in business, we all have to motivate creative people at one time or another to be successful. What have you learned about how to motivate the creative person? And there is a difference, some people are more right brain and others are left brains, but you got to deal with, creative people. A lot of people would call them at times prima donnas. I'm not saying that's the case, but what I'm saying is that how do you use your empathy to get into the heads of the creative mind?
Well, it's a wonderful question, and if people could see our podcast, they'd see my huge smile while you're asking me that. My husband a few months ago said, "Honey, you've made a career out of working well with really creative people." And I do think that has been a little bit of my advantage. Is number one, I simply love the creative process, and I come at it from a vantage of perhaps being I'm not a failed writer, but I wasn't good enough to be a writer, but I wanted to be. So maybe there's a little bit of me that's sort of the frustrated creative inside there, but I honor and I respect what the creative mindset can do. And I believe that creativity moves business. So I truly feel my role is to help make sure all that genius gets into the world. And to your point, a lot of times creatives can be so deeply into the creative product or into the art form that a lot of times it doesn't get communicated right or positioned right. And that, I think, has really been a lot of the story of my career, is being able to be right beside deeply creative people and help them unlock how to get their ideas into the world, into business, into branding. And I enjoy it. I love it. I don't think the world would be as good as it is without creativity. So I feel like it's really meaningful and important work, but I sort of think I know my role in the process, and I've got a little niche there that I just love. And I recently got to see my former creative partner from DDB, and I just didn't want to let him go. I just clung to him. I just love him. Gave him the biggest hug, and it just that partnership. It's sort of the yin to my yang. I just it unlocks something in me that I think makes me better at what I do, and I hope that I do the same for them.
Wendy, you mentioned this a little bit earlier about it. You mentioned being underestimated. And you're obviously very confident. You've had great track record. Has there ever been a time in your career where you look back and you felt like you were really underestimated? And if so, how'd you handle it?
Well, the truth is I feel underestimated a lot of the time. And maybe that's I think we talk about imposter syndrome a lot. And I'm very quick to say, I think no matter if you've been working 5 years or 29 years like me, that voice inside of your head is always there. I think the benefit of age and experience is you can control the voice a little bit more, and you know when to listen to it and when not to. But underestimation for me is a very powerful tool, and I actually talk about it a lot. So one of the talks I gave at Cannes and a couple other places was called Belief, Bravery, and Being Underestimated. And I would say those are sort of the underpinnings to how I would color my journey. I believe belief is the most powerful lever in business. I try to create belief with our teams, belief in our vision, belief in our potential and what's possible, and certainly in the agency side, belief in the potential of our clients' brands. Bravery means you have to put yourself out there. You have to be willing to take those bets. They need to be informed bets, but the victor doesn't get the spoils without being brave. And so there's a certain measure of bravery if you're going to put some content in the world between India and Pakistan that is required, particularly in marketing. And then being underestimated is not allowing yourself to get frustrated by being underestimated, but actually thinking about that as fuel in your tank. So in any moment in my career when people have underestimated me, and honestly, it's happened dozens of times, so many times I couldn't really even probably tell you when it hasn't happened. I think, I've felt that at every step of my career. But when people do underestimate me, I just kind of clock it away. So I go, okay, I see. When I joined Coke, I can tell you plainly, when I joined Coke, the sort of rumor in the hallways was, well, Joe Tripodi needed a female direct report. There were no women on his team. And so that I got the job because I was a woman. I heard it. I heard the whispers. I understood it. And I just kind of just stacked that away for the moment I need it. And I thought, because when people underestimate you, you thought the bar was high up here, but when they underestimate you, what they're actually saying is, she's not. So we're going to put the bar down here because she's not going to actually be able to do it. So they lower expectations for you, and then you sort of crush it, right? Because they've got these lowered expectations, and then you're like, all right, bring it. And this sort of hooks right into my competitive gene, because I'll outwork, I'll out anything, anyone. you underestimate me. I sort of say, you want a skipping contest? I'll outskip you. We will go to the match. So underestimation, I think, can be very powerful if you just get it in the right place in your brain and don't buy into it and don't let it frustrate you, but let it fuel you. It can be incredibly powerful.
I think you've got a full tank there. That's really great. And you've also said that you don't believe in work-life balance. That really, that's a pretty strong statement. What do you mean by that?
Well, again, as a woman, forever, people have told me, well, you just need more. In the times where things have felt completely out of kilter, and I felt like I wasn't doing a good job at home or a good job at work. And as I mentioned, I've got 3 children. I would go to my bosses at the time and they'd say, well, you just need more balance in your life. And I think to myself, that's just such crap. I mean, it's just impossible to do the job that I think the way it should be done, be as present as I need to as a wife and as a mother, and as a daughter and as a friend. I mean, keep going and going as a community volunteer. I mean, that people's lives have all this dimension that you want to do. And so what I talk about, well, it might feel like a slight spin on words. I truly mean it, is that it's not about work-life balance. It's about work-life integration. And you've got to integrate your life in a way that works for you. For instance, I now work for a Japanese company. Ask me what time my first meeting was this morning.
It had to be
5 a.m. So 5 a.m. Any given day of the week, it's 6 a.m. But it was a particular doozy this morning. It was 5 a.m., which means now that it's almost 5. I've been working for 12 hours. So in a typical day like this, if I have a window in the middle of the day where I have an hour, I will go and work out from 2 to 3. Because I've been going since 5. Now, in a regular work day, you'd say, well, from 2 to 3, you might need to be available. Well, from 5, if I'm available from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m., then I'm going to do my workout when I might have done it in the morning. And this is what I mean by work-life integration. You've got to integrate the piece parts of your life in the way that works for you and only you. My life isn't like your life, but when someone says balance, this creates this ridiculous expectation of this sort of tug of war. And I was unwilling to put the family I love against the job I love and just kind of duke it out. So you finally splice your life and integrate the aspects of your life that you need. And the most important lesson I learned in all of that is what people most want from me, whether I'm at work, whether I'm with my children, with my mother, with my husband, with my friends. What people most want from you in any given moment is your attention. They want your focus and they want your undivided attention. And what these things do, these phones do, is break our attention. Because what you find yourself doing is, yes, I'm listening to you, honey. Tell me about your day at school. And you've got this phone in your hand and you're looking down and you're going, and that doesn't count. So finally splicing the integration of your life, if it means having dinner with my family and then getting back onto a call, but doing that in a finely spliced way where everyone has my attention in the moment they need it, that is life integration. And that's delivering what people most want from me. And by the way, what I most want for my own life, to be with those people in the moment and be really present.
That's great. You talked about bravery a little bit earlier, and I follow you on Twitter, and you're an unabashed Democrat. Now, most leaders shy away from being so public with their political views. Yes. In fact, I've seen very few leaders really come out like you've come out. And you're in a business where you got to appeal to clients, and this is a hotbed of action and divisiveness, particularly today.
Yes.
Why do you break that trend of others? And have you ever had it backfire on you?
Well, it's a very fair question, and it's one that I've been that I do think about because I understand that there will be people, clients of ours, that will have different political persuasion. But the one thing that I know to be true, and what I would advise all of our 45,000 people and anyone listening, is you've got to be true to yourself. I'm better. Back to a worse them or a better me. I'm better when I can be the full me. And part of being the full me is that I am a Democrat. That doesn't believe that I would never, be a divisive person. I don't believe in the division that's out there today. And I believe in cross-party affiliation and working to joint outcomes. But I am a Democrat, and to obscure that and not allow that to come forward would be me not being honest with myself, and therefore me not being the best me. I think it's also been widely understood that I did take a sabbatical from Coke at one point and work on Hillary Clinton's campaign. So it's sort of widely known. It would be hard for me to obscure my background, given that I'm in WikiLeaks and other things. So, I think I own that. And what I would always preach to my children and to anyone else is that I think the prosperity of the country will come when the parties work together. I don't believe in the division, and I would never espouse the division, but I do support a Democratic ticket.
Well, that's great. This has been so much fun, Wendy, catching up with you. And I like to have a little bit more fun with you with this lightning round of Q&A.
Lightning round. I was waiting for it.
What 3 words best describe you?
Mom marketer, relentless optimist.
What's your favorite color and why?
I suppose it's black, because it's easy. Someone said to me, I see that you're wearing black today, which was sort of a joke of when do I not wear black? But I don't know. I think it's easy. I like it, but that's not because I'm a morbid person. So I don't know why.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Entitlement. I do not like entitled people.
If you could be one person for a day, who would it be and why?
Oh, goodness gracious. Can it be it's someone who's passed away?
Anybody you want.
I would say Gandhi.
And why?
Because I mean, I would just to be in his body and his mindset for a day would have been. I think he was one of the most epic and amazing humans to ever walk the planet. It would be a privilege.
What's something about you that few people would know, Wendy?
I have different color eyes. I have a green eye and a blue eye.
Oh, okay. So you're multi.
And the green eye gets really green when I'm angry. That's a tip.
Do you have any hidden talents?
Well, I'm hoping it one day will be Japanese, but right now, no, I don't think I have any hidden talents. I'm not good at those. No hobbies really.
Number one skill is a leader has to have. Number one soft skill.
Do I have to pick one? I've already said empathy, so I'm going to book that in the rest of the thing. I would say I think energy is probably the number one thing that I bring.
You talked about growing earlier and learning, and how are you trying to grow yourself as a leader today, and what do you do to stay on top of your own game?
I think my mom always used to say, use your mouth and ears in the proportion that they're given to you. I really try to listen more than I speak. And, especially I think in these very senior roles, there's an expectation that you do speak, and goodness knows I've got a gift for gab, so I can, loquacious is not a word I'm unfamiliar with. But I really, really try to listen. And especially marketing, is changing to the points that we were talking about Coke earlier. The marketing that I knew that I cut my teeth on is very different from the marketing of today. So I have a lot of learning to do constantly with our teams, and making sure I'm at the forefront of understanding what marketing looks like so that we're leading this company correctly. So listening, and I think even just the personality and the willingness from a mental state to say you don't have all the answers and to say you need to constantly learn, I think in and of itself helps make sure that you do.
You talked about the importance of driving authenticity and earlier on, and I want to close by asking you this one question. When you look at the topic of diversity and inclusion, what would be the single biggest takeaway you've had that you think that if you can drive it in your company, it'll do the most to drive social justice, the most to drive the belief that everybody can perform and grow at equal levels? What have you learned?
Well, I've learned so much. I think number one, the thing I always want to remind us of is too often diversity and inclusion gets labeled as the right thing to do. And I think that's a lazy explanation. Diversity and inclusion is good for business. In every single study that is undertaken on diversity of boards, of leadership teams, of working teams, those teams outperform their non-diverse counterparts. And so I like to remind us that yes, it's the right thing to do, but principally, this is a very good business decision. Like, this is the right thing to do for the business, not just for humanity. So I think this gets kind of wrapped up in this very soft space. And this is a hardcore business decision that anyone who's not making this is setting their business backwards. So I think, framing it that way, number one. And then number two, that the empathy of wanting to understand and truly, listening to the lived experiences of our people who are, from various backgrounds, have, various dimensions of their lives that are diverse by the definition that we might use, is super important. And so we had a leadership team meeting my second week on the job. I wore a t-shirt that was the Denso logo in the LGBT rainbow. And I just can't tell you how many people sent me comments that said, I felt seen. That our CEO would wear a rainbow Dentsu t-shirt means that you see me and that you want me to be here. And I think we have to remember, as leaders, we have a responsibility to show people that they matter, that we see them, that this is a place for them. And even whether my sexual orientation is the same as theirs or not, does not matter. This is about making sure they know that they are welcome, and I see them fully and deeply, and I want them to be in our company.
Well, Wendy, I knew I was going to have a blast talking to you today, and it's exceeded my high expectations. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with me and to share your, I think, really, really great insights.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you for having me. It's been a great hour of my day with you.
I can't believe I didn't hire you. That kills me.